sometimes you just don't come through.
DETERIORNATION. I think that one fascist example of some of the most unprincipled types of talk you can possibly encounter concerning art and you, is that sort of phraseology that stipulates interpretation and interpretationalism as if it were an entity of its own, or a third party. In that sense, pretty much most forms of art can be like a Rorschach. If you think of the ink, the famous ink blot, used as a sort of cognitive therapy tool by counselors and psychologists, psychiatrists, and you pay attention to what people around you will say to you about art that you are mutually experiencing together, or art that you show them, and you pay attention to what they have to say about the art that they and you are looking at together. Yeah. So obviously those who, cause and effect is always going to be cause and effect, but if people are so stupid not to understand that you're quite capable of interpreting art your own way, and are thereby using doesn't have to be critical thinking faculties, but thinking for yourself in order to interpret art, then well, anyone that isn't comprehensive of that as a start, I think well, they're not going to be the best company to appreciate art with, at least. But they might even be evangelical Christians or Freemason chemists. Buy Gippsland Dairy, mango, passion fruit, twist yogurt from your local capital chemist. DETERIORNATION. Oh, hi. Again, in my capital and my healthcare capital reflection, reminiscences and nostalgia, I was often in the presence of pharmacists who were partial to saying such and such a person is a junkie, and it was like a spook term when you're new, because in that it's a term thrown around vastly more often than it's, I guess, qualified by appeal to other reasoning, and the two people who would use that term the most were always seen as massively authoritative. But then I learned that that comes from them starting the chain as one point. Secondly, I then learned they're these Freemasons, and so they have a lot of dislike for a lot of qualities in society, and one of which worth mentioning is just dreaming, the imagination. Such expressions I've heard used have included when the kids come out to play, was one description for dreaming. Dreamers they didn't see as intelligible. Now, or it's it's a lot more complicated than that, and that's part of something I'll explain in the second book. But so I was just discussing this recently, like how do you define a junkie? And the best workable definition I came up with was like a sort of person who might sell out morally in many ways that just leave you thinking, well, this is just putrid, that this person has done all of these things pretty much just for drugs. There are certain behaviors, like if you were to go through a public dumpster or a trash, wheelie bin disposal unit to try to search for drugs. I've seen people do this, whether they're searching for needles or supplies of drugs. I wouldn't know. But I see it as being someone who would break their own moral code or contradict their own moral code or break their friend's trust or dog out on any deal that they negotiate and arrange. I've seen it before. A neighbor wants some drugs for themselves, and this is going, over the years. I'm looking back. Someone comes up to me saying, "Well, I gave my neighbor such amount of money to buy me drugs, and they just took off. Said they'd be back in half an hour to 45 minutes, and never returned." And then they see that same person an hour and a half later, and they're high on whatever drugs that and so you work out that they spent the neighbor's money, and essentially an ensemble of moral sellouts, strictly with them having an eye to procure drugs. So to me, that's being junky, because the other lines of argument, I don't feel lead to accurate or fair or balanced or realistic conclusions, because the term couldn't have been used in the business just to describe those people that had come into the pharmacy just for the fact that they were getting certain drugs in the pharmacy. That wouldn't be possible without dubbing those products themselves to be junk, or and that's not something that I don't think a pharmacist has never done before. Is like, some pharmacists have said, well, you should never use drugs at all, and that's a very weird thing to say in a way, because a drug being any substance to have a pharmacological effect on the body then brings caffeine into the tobacco, alcohol, tea bags, caffeine, all these substances then therefore become drugs. A can of mother. So then there's the second consideration, which is that the drugs referred to when one is deemed a junkie are drugs not able to be purchased in a pharmacy. I think it'd be interesting to see what would happen if Australia were to adopt many of the conclusions reached by the powers that be in the Netherlands, who I understand to be quite liberal, because just the sort of fascist arguments that are in place that don't that don't add up, that contradict each other. Seems the Netherlands have been quite progressive in that regard, and quite a lot of substances there. It's beyond Amsterdam, where you can go to a cafe and get weed and mushrooms and things like that. So then, if that's the case, and it's a referral to a reference to street drugs, non-pharmacy drugs, they're the junk. Well, the immediate, there would be. So you're just saying that because these drugs aren't available in a pharmacy. And that then raises other questions like, would you sell them in a pharmacy if you were permitted to by the TGA, or because there's been a lot of it's almost like this is the age of the censorship of drugs. You've got, I mean, pseudoephedrine was a popular product when I first joined pharmacy, and there's cold and flu, day and night cold and flu combinations were paracetamol, 500 milligram codeine, 8 milligram, and pseudoephedrine, I think 30 milligram. But prior to that, there used to be, pseudo means false, so pseudoephedrine means false ephedrine, and so the older cold and flu stock would have paracetamol, codeine, and ephedrine. And as I understood it, further discussions and meetings about ephedrine having too much euphoria attached to its side effects led to the development of pseudoephedrine. And that became like the censored, it'll unblock your nose, but you won't have that uplifted feeling, and a buzzy, uplifting feeling. And then as more years passed, then they started, I think, to have a rehash of those similar sorts of arguments that they had with ephedrine, but about pseudoephedrine. And there were controversies about, people could buy a pseudoephedrine, use it, change it, and make meth or speed. So they started to, knuckle down on sales of pseudoephedrine and try to promote phenylephrine to anyone that would ask for the cold and flu products. And phenylephrine was, I think it was the drug you would find in Dimetap. If you remember that when you were a child, it was if you had a runny or stuffy nose, phenylephrine served as a decongesting agent. And then there's something similar has happened in recent times with codeine containing products. It would be they've pulled now from the shelves all of the Schedule 2 and Schedule 3 codeine containing products, and some of them, I think, they are still available, but a prescription is required. Which and this is an interesting point, because from what I was told about pharmacology manuals and stuff, the therapeutic dose of codeine is like 30 milligrams or 30 to 60 milligrams every 4 to 6 hours, depending on the doctor's directions and the severity of the pain. So, like 30 milligrams of codeine is apparently broken down by the body and turned into 5 milligrams or so of morphine or something like that. Now, So, and this is an interesting point because it was for many years that Panadine was available as Schedule 2, which is to say over-the-counter pain relief, pain reliever, painkiller with, in addition to paracetamol. Now, each one of those pills would contain 500 milligrams of paracetamol and 8 milligrams of codeine. So it's interesting when you consider that the therapeutic dose starts at 30 milligrams, because if you've got, you obviously can't take more than a gram of paracetamol every 4 to 6 hours, or 4 times a day, and that relates to I think the liver's production of lactic acid. A certain amount of lactic acid is needed to break down 1 gram of paracetamol, and if there's not enough time for more lactic acid to be built by the body, proportionate to the frequency at which that 1 gram of paracetamol has been ingested, then the paracetamol won't get broken down properly and it can attack the liver. So this means essentially that in all those years that Panadine at 8 milligrams per tablet was available. It was a subtherapeutic dose of codeine. Anyway, it means if you took 2 Panadine tablets, you'd get 1 gram of paracetamol, followed by 16 milligrams of codeine. So there you have it. If that minimal therapeutic dose is 30 milligrams, then taking 16 milligrams is only, half the strength plus 1 milligram more than the minimal therapeutic dose of codeine. So one would say if you experienced analgesia from taking 2 Panadine tablets, the pain was probably of such a low severity that paracetamol on its own would have been enough, because apparently just that 16 milligrams of codeine is fuck all. So there's still Panadine Forte on script, but and then there's still the Nurofen Plus now and the Midol 15 and the old Schedule 3 products that contain 12, ranging from 12.8 milligrams to 15 milligrams of codeine in a tablet or capsule, and they're still available, but they're about. I mean, it would be cheaper for everybody to just be getting a Panadine Forte script now, because I think you could be charged $20 for a packet of Midol, and you might get a Panadine Forte for $6.50, and it's twice the codeine, the proper therapeutic dose of codeine. So what they were doing with ephedrine, pseudoephedrine now, they've moved into the terrain of mild opiates, and yeah, I mean, it would have been interesting to have read specific debates about what prompted this initiative to say that codeine was so bad it had to go, because I would surely, if anything, I would have seen that there were a trial period of time where all they did was get rid of the 8 milligram containing codeine, in such as with Panadine, because if they're claiming that this is now a dangerous drug, what if could it have been that people were just taking extra Panadine to try to get the codeine levels up to what it would have been if they had that basic therapeutic dose of 30 milligrams of codeine, and in doing so took too much Panadine and caused themselves some harm. I mean, I would have been fascinated to have heard those debates, which I think the TGA have. But yeah, with stereotypes, I think it's very hard to just take a look at somebody, for instance, as they, walk into a pharmacy and think you've sized them up and you know who to call. They've got a barrage of various terms: mystery shoppers and junkies, and to know who's who without a backlog of specific information that you've confronted with their degree. Discounted them from claiming legitimacy with regards to their health needs and their health needs in relation to the particular substances for which they might choose to go to a pharmacy. But if it is that point that a junkie is someone not using substances sold only in pharmacies, then that would say some interesting things about Capital Chemist conference weekends. Ecstasy here, ecstasy there. So I don't quite understand the franchise's dogmatic aptitude for the indictment of people's be they recreational choices or what. Certain MDMA studies, I think the tablet supplies of MDMA were being used to see if couples having emotional difficulties in their relationships, they would try MDMA and sit down and talk about their real feelings. And I'm not going to try to argue that every street drug is not a recreational drug, but is, but then at the same time, I'm also not prepared to say that I think every drug in a pharmacy is so controversial a substance with such recreational potential that it warrants all these sorts of prejudices that have been seen in the past. And that I like hearing about progressive decisions where they're saying now that you could go to a music event. I haven't been to a music event in fucking years, but how they're starting to say that maybe pill testing facilities for those that do bring pills with them is a better or more viable option for those people than just getting patted down or chased down with dogs, losing a $25 ecstasy pill they bought to go and enjoy some live music. Also, it is always tragic though if a bad batch of pills had gone around and someone at a music event were endangered by that, and then there could have been a pill testing facility where a simple test was run on their pill and they were able to tell them at the stall, oh, you've got a bad pill. So I actually think those stalls are a good idea, so long as no discrimination is imposed on the possessor of their pill at their event. I think it would be good for them. And there was the other remark about junkies being people that don't clean their teeth. No, I did keep that one and bear that one to mind. I thought that was, but then you'll find too, I think, that in many cases, ones that reach that point too also have they often tend to be like the ones I mentioned just earlier that will go through the bins and and lose a friend every week because they ran off with the money to go see a dealer somewhere, and yeah. So with ad hominems, to make them as less ad hominem as you can, it's good to clearly define the parameters of the concepts or concepts for which a particular term is being represented. And it's good to explain what those are to those around you. Otherwise, all you really know is a pejorative noun has been introduced. Yeah, so that's a shame. I'd hoped that, yeah, these sorts of crackdowns. It's a shame to my mind too that people in the population seem to be drawn to various drugs at a much younger age than I would think sensible. I'd never really tried anything beyond a little bit of weed smoking till like 19, aged, yeah, late 18, aged 19, and now I'm hearing stories of they look really like kids. You just think it's not good to see. So that's why I think these people that are doing these pill testing stalls are onto something, because what they're onto doing is essentially they're being more realistic, I think, than some of these other gatekeepers to drugs. They're not being propagandists. They're not being fascist. They're not kidding themselves, pretending that these substances aren't out there getting used on a regular basis. What they are doing is saying, given that this sort of thing is happening, and is going to happen, whether we do anything or not, our best bet for health and safety reasons for these people is to provide them with a means to verify for them that the substances that they do have in their possessions aren't containing any fatal or near fatal or damaging poisonous elements. So this idea of pill testing stalls at music events, I think, is a good one. And if initiatives like that fly through and get approved of without any opposition from my old youth pastor, or that woman that's on, the evangelist woman that's often on after midnight, there's maybe other things they could do, like I'm sure that some certain speeches could be given on the growth of the brain, the maturation process for the brain, and why it's good to be like an adult more or less before you choose to try any. I mean, you can't buy alcohol unless you're an adult. So harder drugs, common sense to me was not to try any of the harder drugs till past the age of being able to drink. Though there was arguments around about many street drugs being better on the intestinal tract than alcohol is. So we're now half an hour on drugs. Yeah. So rather than kicking out and fucking off codeine, and I mean, it was enough that they fucked off ephedrine and cold and flu, and then fucked off. Then they've had to fuck off pseudoephedrine, which I just don't understand. These crackdowns, because the replacement, particularly from the switch for pseudoephedrine to phenylephrine. There's just I mean, they should be two completely different families of drugs. There's hardly any beneficial decongestant properties really in phenylephrine for an adult with a really blocked nose from a cold. And but in closing, I never saw anyone getting called junkie when ecstasy's going around at Capital Chemist staff conferences. So yeah, the term I think maybe could be used with a little better proprietary. The question is, do I use the term in relation to the person who stole various items from my bin and former property in Downer, January of 2010. And to answer that question, I would definitely have to find out who it was exactly. But anyway, I'm very tired. It's time for sleep.
I'm the bartender.
Attention, Facebook friends. Many of you have been have become privy to the fact that these have not been easy years for me. I'm working through them, and it's amazing the surprise of just what supports, brilliant minds that you've always admired, been incredibly relevant at helping you once again to deal with things as they always had. You all know I'm a tremendous fan of Marilyn Manson and Korn for more than 2 decades. Yeah, 22 years. So there are 4 songs. I've put a list on Facebook already to recommend them to you, but I'd like to encourage you to watch and absorb and contemplate the following 7 songs. The first is called Say-10. That's not Satan, as in the devil. It's SAY10, Say-10. On one level it refers to Heaven Upside Down being Marilyn Manson's 10th album, but the film clip features Johnny Depp. In fact, if you're that interested, please look at the original Say-10 promo clip. It's incomplete. It's an incomplete song, but I would encourage you to watch it prior to watching the official clip to Say-10 starring Johnny Depp. Then after that is a song called Kill For Me, also by Marilyn Manson, and also again featuring Johnny Depp in the clip. For me, that song is about my writing style. There's a part where, the line is sideways for attention, long ways for results, and it's how it's sort of a methodology that I began to develop and teach myself with the assistance of various sources of inspiration, philosophically and artistically, in the early millennium. I tested some hypotheses about the mentality of a person in a relationship who considers themselves to be in a relationship with the Christian biblical God and the biblical Jesus, as if they were still alive, talking to them and things like that. So yeah, I would encourage you to watch. Please watch that clip. That's cool for me. Followed by a song called "We Know Where You Fucking Live." That song's personal to me on many levels too. It's about, to me, you'll notice the car windshield has the location ride printed in it. That's to refer to Sydney. When I was a kid and during the worst moments of my childhood, I was roughly 6 months prior to the worst moment of my childhood, as you all know about, my close friends anyway. What I'm not sure everyone's aware of is the fact that I had been in Sydney for half a year prior to it. So, they know I'm intellectually against violence. I'll always try and talk before, in order to prevent things like violence from having place. But people who have judged me and think that I could be the heir or the inheritor of violent criminal motives due to that event in 1989, it's important to me that they rethink themselves, because I was genuinely in Sydney with my grandparents and cousins and aunt and uncle, and was pulled out of kindergarten and missed about half of kindergarten. All the kids in the class made me a compilation of drawings of covers of Mr. Men books and stapled it together and sent it to me as a gift to help cheer me up and calm down. Then there's a song called Tattooed in Reverse, which is important to me too. It's one I still take quite some time to think about. Fifthly is a cover song called Cry Little Sister. It momentarily escapes me who the original artist was, but it's more of a quite placid and chilled cover song for Marilyn to choose. I'm quite impressed with it. Now that's 5, and the other 2 songs to give you 7. Help me concentrate on there being 7 days in a week. Rudimentary little things like that chronic and disabling headache will distract your attention from. But there's a song about, to me it's about mistreatment in psychiatry, by Jonathan Davis. The song is by Jonathan Davis from his solo album Black Labyrinth, and the song is called What It Is. Lastly is the song that I think is possibly my favorite song out of all of Jonathan Davis. This is originally produced solo music. It's a fucking awesome song, but it's called Everyone. So I'm getting quite tired. I want to go to bed soon, so I'll love you and leave you.
I know what you interview me about. I'm rambling about.
Can you say watch Luke Banton on YouTube?
Watch Luke Banton on YouTube.
Thanks, Max.
Yeah, you're welcome. Alright.
Good morning, fair YouTube and DETERIORNATION. I'm your cordial host, Fernando. Sorry, I'm Luke Banton, and I wanted to touch on for the about fourth take that controversial question: how pivotal, or how was there a relation at all between the progress of Hitler's rise to power, leadership of the Third Reich, and is it true that something can be said to the charge that atheism was the motivation for the greatest crimes known to the 20th century? Now, on that matter, let's draw back and run back to, like, I think it's late 1920s. Hitler had written a diary that he called Mein Kampf. I think the title means my journey. And Hitler's talking about how hard it was for him to rise to power and such and such and such. But there's a particular chapter where he says that I feel like I am serving as an agent of the Creator. By fighting off the Jews, I am doing the Lord's work. So that's a point where his motives, as far as his own diary on his journey, is accounting for. He has declared a form of a Christian motivation there. Was he aware Jesus was a Jew? Not if you believe he flew to the moon on the third day. I suppose you forget about the race at that point. But it's funny, this debate on Hitler, because Christians take offense to the suggestion that their scriptures and that Christian dogmas could have influenced Hitler at all. And so you watch a lot of these debates go back and forward, and it seems that it seems that they would like to pin the blame, as well as with Stalinism, on atheists. Well, not on atheists as people, but on atheism as an ideological refraining from stepping forward into a theistic, neural culture. Now, where this gets a little tricky is that later on in his military career, Friedrich Nietzsche, by the way, had since died, and Adolf Hitler got the privilege to visit his home, preserved as one of his dying wishes by his sister. And so Adolf Hitler goes and visits Nietzsche's former house, and and then he seems to go off onto this phase of Nietzschean thinking, interpreted Hitler style. Now, on YouTube you'll find a documentary series entitled Geniuses of the Modern World, and one episode does draw strict attention to Nietzsche. The woman in it is quite insightful, and I thought that she and I actually saw eye to eye on a number of matters. We'd formed a lot of similar opinions. I mean, Nietzsche had been dead quite a while before Hitler's time, especially his time in power. And it really does. It does show something about the ability to pervert reasoning in itself, because you've got him here in Mein Kampf saying, I'm convinced I'm acting as an agent of the Creator by fighting off the Jews. I'm doing the Lord's work. Mein Kampf, meaning my struggle, I think it is, my journey or my struggle. Now, and then, yeah, I think this could have been, I'm guessing this might well have been after the Catholic Church started to say, like, okay, fuck you, Hitler. Like, we're hiding people who are at threat in chapels, and you can, Christians who, they're probably Christians who know more about this side of the story than me. All I'm trying to say, this points out, is there is no such thing as one philosophical influence for Hitler's genuinely evil career, and I do not doubt for a moment that it was anything but an evil career. But the only thing, if you were to subtract his mistreatment and killings of the Jews, if you were to do all that, then, you know, I think his speeches triumph of the will, were they not so anti-Semitic in their, you know, in their design, I might commend a thing or two that he had to say on willpower. Now, where did he get this doctrine or this fascination with philosophical willpower? And to answer that question, I'll have to tell you of another mentor and mentoree. Now, the first is called Arthur Schopenhauer, and the second one is Friedrich Nietzsche. So, as far as the differences between pupil and teacher went here with Nietzsche, in fact, I think it's the same deal. Schopenhauer had been dead, and then Nietzsche just took fascinated interest in his works. And amongst the works of Schopenhauer, though, I've got some great books that have amalgamated essays and short written pieces included into these, these best release type sort of books. But Schopenhauer was more well known for a 3-part massive treatise. They're very thick volumes, each volume 1, 2, and 3, but they're titled The World as Will and Idea, or The World as Will and Representation, depending on the translator you have. And he essentially it's like a dualist view in a way, except it's not about the mind, where like you're mind-body dualist or you're mind-soul dualist, or he essentially said, you know, we are us as conscious beings, we know this thing called will, and we are essentially a manifestation of will. But the world around us is nothing more than the manifestations of ideas, of which we are capable of comprehending at any point. This is not the. Don't get me wrong and go further than I'm prepared to, and say that he was promoting worldviews and dogmatic worldviews that you can never get out of once you form them. Blah, blah. He was much more humble. I don't doubt the humility of Arthur Schopenhauer, but I do question his pessimism. Schopenhauer was notorious as a pessimist, for some of the logical conclusions of his writings pointed to the suggestion that the race would be better off if had it not began to exist, we'd be better off had we never been born. But I think Nietzsche found that he didn't share in Schopenhauer's pessimism. Nietzsche had himself had sort of a heartbreak exiting of the church at age 5. The son of a Lutheran pastor and pastor's wife. He was very fascinated and into Jesus for up until about that age of 5. Father dies, and Nietzsche impressively was one of the youngest university honored philosophy professors by about the age of 25. So he was a well sought after person. But from his admiration with Arthur Schopenhauer, he essentially incorporated various arguments and concepts of the willpower and the human will into his own philosophies. Now, some of those philosophies, you may well have heard of them to include that famous statement, God is dead, which Friedrich Nietzsche wrote. It first appears to my knowledge in a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra. But if you are into looking up Nietzsche, I would recommend other books such as Esse Homo, The Gay Science, written before, back when gay meant happy. Beyond Good and Evil, The Genealogy of Morals, The Antichrist. What I say, Thus Spoke Zarathustra already. You laughing at me, Fernando? You laugh at me? No. Anyway, now there's some brilliant prose in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He says things like, man is something that is to be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? Behold, I teach you the Superman. You have gone from worm to man, and yet much in you is still worm. And what is ape to man? A laughing stock or a painful embarrassment. But that which is ape to man, so are you unto the Superman. And the Superman is really I guess a noun given to this, a title to this philosophical existentialist concept of the overcoming of oneself. He argues we should overcome one another time and time again as much as we can. It's the only way to grow, as if. Yeah, so now what I think happened then, so Nietzsche may have arguably taken some of the best ideas of Schopenhauer's on the will and incorporated it into his own sort of, albeit antichrist. Nietzsche refused not to live life in the sort of positivity that he he wanted to be happy. But what I think happened with Mr. Hitler is that he took this doctrine of the Superman. Man is something that should be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? And read that line and thought it was an immediate reference to the entire Jewish race all over again. So because of that, and despite the fact that Nietzsche had been dead before Hitler's time, Nietzsche has unfairly throughout history been credited as the man who influenced Adolf Hitler. Because at least the Christians certainly won't step forward and say, well, we influenced him first. Point is, once a person makes their convictions their own, be they existential, moral, philosophical, integrity is in reinforcing, the nerves of that decision. Yeah, so there's some great prose in the Antichrist. Nietzsche writes, we must not deck out and embellish Christianity, for it has waged a war against mankind. And need we say who our enemies are? Theologians and all those who hold theological blood in their veins. This is our whole story. And he talks about this opposition to theology, which after writing God is Dead in the same book, he meets a worshipper parading around in a nearby forest. And so, yeah, once confronted, Nietzsche... What was I saying? Anyway, this doctrine of the Superman and of taking... It's all about the individual. And it's the first thing defendants of Nietzsche have always made sense of. His other books, The Genealogy of Morals, you know, it's all about the self overcoming who they once were. Nietzsche was once a church boy at age 5, you know, he had to overcome himself. And I disagree in the way in which he did it in his book, The Antichrist, because... But then we have 200 years of biblical scholarship that Nietzsche hasn't, or will never be able to factor in. But these ideas, which it seemed it was meant for the Hyperboreans, the Nietzschean readers, who want to overcome themselves in willpower. So he would say, man is something to be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? And I think Hitler taking text like that and interpreting it as, well, I must be chosen to overcome these Jews. Wrong interpretation. But anyway, so point A is that this could be done with just about anything. Like if the Nazis were rounding up Jewish people and pushing them off walls, they could have been singing Humpty Dumpty instead of quoting Nietzsche. You know, overcoming yourself is not the same thing as overcoming a race of Jewish people. But Hitler couldn't tell the difference, what with all his the micro penis that medical documents have demonstrated he once had, and also with, you know, tastes for corporophagia and a practice involving the oral eating of fecal matter, feces, poo, or shit, or whatever you might like to call it, things like that, which Hitler was into. And it really, he's the best example of that old cliche that the fighter only really fights themselves. But it's just an insulting topic to me, because I like to defend the credibility of philosophers who have inspired me, and Nietzsche is one of them. So I don't think it is fair. And feel free to challenge me with arguments on the YouTube channel, or Luke Banton on Facebook, or Luke Banton on Instagram, or Luke Banton on YouTube. If you think Hitler should be blamed on Nietzsche, but I don't think that's right. These tasks, these are all it's all poetry and existentialist prose to help one overcome oneself as they set new goals in life. You know, fueled by willpower at every day. Overcome yourself and experience what Nietzsche called the transvaluation, or the revaluation of all values, and experience celebrating what he called the death of God. He called us murderers in that regard. We have now killed God, and there must be a re-evaluation of all values, for all the good was said to come from God, but now God is dead, and so good and evil must mean something else. And I'll close on a quote from Nietzsche where he said that which is done out of love is always beyond good and evil. Take care, YouTubers. And by Black Star, by the late David Bowie. Miss you, Bowie. Come back to the webisodes.